So welcome everyone. Sorry for not recording the meeting. We are having some technical difficulties with Zoom today. I'm not quite sure what's the actual problem. I know that for myself, I have upgraded to the latest, greatest version, which is apparently freezing every single time I'm trying to share my screen. Okay, quick announcements before we get into the main topics is that we are now officially in the code slush, which started yesterday, which basically means that only high severity, only bugs and PRs that were approved and looked good to me before yesterday can land. The code freeze is September 4th, which is next Tuesday. And the bar for getting code in during the code freeze is super high, which basically means super high severity issues that might be blocking 1.12 release. If you got assigned to an issue that is such a bug, please handle those as soon as possible. And one last third announcement is that we are going to change the Zoom number for the SIG CLI meeting, and if everything goes well, we will do that within the next week. So you should get a calendar update with the new number. So please check the calendar invite for the new number. For security reasons and problems with malicious user joining our Slacks and Zoom meetings, this will not be announced anywhere. Only the invites will have the most up-to-date number. So please check that one before joining. Next topic on the agenda is the test grid. I got the privilege to be the test on call for the past 2 weeks. And I must admit that for the past 2 weeks, the queue was relatively quiet. I haven't seen any major flakes that were concerning or problems with tests that were concerning SIG CLI. I did updated the test coverage. What is important within the test coverage document is that, Sean, can you open the doc for the test coverage?
Yes.
Thanks. So what is important is that I updated the instructions slightly a little bit because as part of the work, and we will be talking a little bit further during stand-ups about it, we moved part of the CLI stuff to a separate repo, which lives in the staging repository. So at the bottom, there will be a separate section for the CLI runtime repository. That will be, and yes, and the instructions are talking about running tests for package kubectl and for staging source cubes, K's CLI runtime. So that's a slight change over what we did before.
So that's what these are.
The last three are the CLI runtime, exactly. If I remember correctly, the next test on call will be Huan. Good luck with that one, Huan. It will be very neat because with the code freeze and everything, it will be super crucial to be on top of the current flakes and problems and incidents that might be happening to the SIG CLI testing suite. If you're interested in signing up, we'll just probably need to add some new columns into the doc. Feel free to add your name to this document, and you can hold the role of test on call, which basically means that you are looking after our test grid and ensuring that the tests are green. And eventually, if there are problems, you need to respond to the test and ping the necessary people. Okay. With that, I think we can go to the main topics. Sean, I added you as the first person since you were writing the SIG CLI charter and you authored the PR itself. So I figure out you will be probably the best person to talk about it. And congratulations on merging the charter.
Yes, so this should be short. We've been bringing up the SIG CLI charter for several meetings now, and the steering committee finally got around to it. We actually had to rebase it on, so they had a common template that was very greatly simplified, so rebased it on this common template. And we had actually, let me bring it up here real quick. There's actually, it's pretty short. That's it. This is just one page of our charter. The vast majority of it is going to be in the like the SIG governance link, which describes the common set of roles for a SIG. And then the important thing to note is how we deviate from this common SIG governance template. And so we had basically two changes to the SIG governance, which is that we had SIG emeritus leads, which I think we're proposing Tony and Fabio. I don't think they're currently defined as those roles, but that's what we'll be implementing shortly. And then the other important change is the test health maintainer role, which is a member of a SIG CLI member, and it's somebody who does basically one of these rotations in the for 2-week test health maintainer. That person will be a SIG CLI member. If you look at it, if you've done one test on call rotation in the last 6 months, then you're a SIG CLI member. And so the other important thing is basically what is in scope for the SIG CLI. The two sub-projects now are kube control and customize. And then we specifically mention what is out of scope, which is other CLIs like kube ADM, because it's owned by SIG Cluster Lifecycle. And then we're not responsible for the API, which is SIG API Machinery's role. So I think that's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
I think what is very important also that happened during writing this SIG charter is that we modified and split the roles of technical leads and leads for this SIG. Currently, there are 2 technical leads for SIG CLI, which is myself and Philip Whitrock. As for the leads, which are responsible for organizing the meetings and taking care of the SIG in general from the organizational perspective, that will be myself again and Sean Sullivan. So that is very important. I have also noticed that since Juan and we pushed together the CLI runtime and the sample CLI plugin, which we'll talk about shortly, I think I need to update the charter to mention these 2 explicitly, as they are our responsibility now. And they eventually, hopefully when I get an approval from SIG architecture, they will be synced to a separate repositories under Kubernetes organization.
Okay, I think that's about it for the charter.
Okay, thanks. The next topic on the agenda is server-side printing and sorting. One, can you give us information what it is about?
Sure. So with regards to sorting, currently we do not support sorting in tandem with server-side printing. So what that means is whenever someone, whenever a user executes kubectl get with a sort by flag, we are essentially defaulting back to the old behavior of using baked-in types in kubectl. So rather than taking advantage of a table response from the server and then using that to print human-readable results, we are essentially still depending on internal, for now, internal versions of objects in order to basically know what fields belong to a certain object and sort by that field. I have a PR open that attempts to somewhat solve this. It's sort of I'm hoping it's a draft for now that we can improve upon in the near future. I'm posting a link to the PR in the chat. The main gist behind this PR is that unlike the old behavior of get, with table sorting, we're not getting a flattened list of resources, but rather for each resource group, we're getting one table object. So because of this, we can't really sort how we used to. So given 10 objects, each of those objects could now contain, say, n number of rows for the amount of that type of resource that exists on the server. And so instead of sorting the 10 objects we get, we essentially have to iterate through each table object and sort each row. And so what this PR is doing is it's essentially sorting all of the rows on one table object. This also comes with limitations. So we are not supporting sorting mixed resource types. So if you do something like kubectl get all, we will not support sorting with that. Yeah, I think that's mainly that's the main limitation of it for now. I'm still addressing comments on it. I'm adding a few tests as well, and I just saw Clayton left a few comments too, so I'll address those. But yeah, so that's sorting for now. If anyone has any questions about it or comments, I'd be happy to take those now.
I think what is also important to note is that about a week ago, I sent a proposal to both Kubernetes dev and SIG CLI mailing lists with an option to entirely deprecate the sort by option, which was rejected by both Brendan and Clayton because they are stating that the sorting is highly required and very desirable feature. So I've noted in the email several problems. One of them is that currently, by default, we chunk the requests, the responses, so that, if I remember correctly, 500. If you do a get on pods, and there are more than 500 pods available in the response, you will only get 500. This, of course, poses some problems when you are sorting data. So from the discussion that we had, both in the PR and on Slack, we agreed that for when you are requesting sorted resources, we are going to disable the chunking to ensure that we are not returning false positive in any way when sorting resources, because obviously you could test sorting with smaller amount of data and then request in a script a bigger chunk of data and get unexpected results. So for that reason, and we considered for a bit a warning that a bigger amount of data might be causing these problems, and explicitly asking users to set the chunk size to a unlimited, which is possible with a kubectl flag. But all in all, we decided that we will just disable chunking whenever a sorting is requested. Other than that, I've looked through the PR that Juan had in place, and it looks reasonably. I would like to get it in time for 112. And the main reason for that is that at some point in time, we would like to entirely get rid of the old printing mechanism, which is also stopping us from extracting kubectl into its own repository. And the reason for that is that we rely on the internal representation of the object, which is kept inside of the API server for returning the data when doing the server-side print. Are there any questions or doubts, proposals to this topic?
Just a quick question, Mache. So my understanding is you guys will be removing the code which is referencing the internal version eventually. That's the goal?
Yes. Currently, the server-side printing is the default printing mechanism in 1.12. If I remember correctly, we made it default in 1.11. But you can still fall back to the old mechanism in using the server-side print false flag, if I remember correctly. At some point in time, I'm hoping that 113 will be the best place. We will just deprecate this functionality, and after some time, we will entirely remove the printing mechanism from kubectl so that it will only rely on the server-side return data. And the main reason for going this direction is that the server-side printing does not require kubectl to know the exact types it is printing, because the server is providing the actual data about the resources and how they should be printed. This allows for either aggregated API servers or CRDs to be printed in a consistent way as the built-in types.
Got it.
It looks like based on Clayton's comment, I guess improvements we can do in the future is what was initially proposed for sorting with chunk with a chunk size enabled, which is just having the client collect all data and then sort instead of disabling it altogether, or using temporary files if needed. Aside from that, the other part of this topic was server-side printing, and so like Machi mentioned, it is a plan for the near future to entirely rely on server-side printing with no fallback mechanism. I believe this is probably something that we want to happen sooner than later. I don't foresee any difficulties with doing this, but maybe it's worth having a Google Doc or something where we can collect feedback and perhaps any fallback that people see as we approach it.
Okay, I think that's pretty much all we have with regard to this topic. Let's skip to the next one, which is printing and terminal width. If you could open the issue, Sean, and have it on the screen, that would be helpful. So for the custom resource definitions, to be able to print the data per your requirement, what you need to define is something that is called additional printer columns, which is basically bottom part of the first YUM definition. By default, if you don't specify the additional printer columns, the server is configured in such a way that it will return the name of your CRD resource and the creation timestamp. If you do specify additional printer columns, we only inject the name by default, and the rest is coming from that additional printer columns definition. So aside from name type and JSON path, how to return the data, there's also a column which is priority. A priority is an integer that can have values from 0 up. And what I stumbled upon is that I created a CRD with a priority 1, and by default, kubectl get did not return me those data. There is, though, an option -OY, which returns additional columns which are not presented when doing server-side print. And I had a discussion with Clayton with regards to if the priority currently is an integer, I would expect that client decide how many data it can actually insert based on the terminal width. Currently, it's a binary decision. Whatever has a priority of 0 will be printed. Everything else is just left out. No matter if it will be a priority of 1 or 100, it will always be omitted when not printing with output wide. So, and we had a discussion with Clayton that maybe within the kubectl get mechanism, or generally within the kubectl printing, we should be considering the terminal width, and based on that, we will be behaving differently and printing the data differently. What I've noticed earlier today that I haven't linked to the agenda, I should probably do so, is that Clayton created APR where we are changing the minimal width for a column. Aside from the reasonable change, it has also led to multiple test failures where we are relying on the width of the minimal width of the output. This comes handy when, for example, when you have values such as, I don't know, number of replicas and similar, where we will be able to go down with the width of the columns that are returning those data. So my question is, how others feel about implementing some mechanism around deciding how big is your terminal, and based on that data, being able to decide how many data we are going to print. Is it something that we want to see being done, or the current approach of everything or only limited set is fine, and the priority that we have inside of the additional printer columns will not be used, or will be used in just a binary, as a binary, and we just need to be explicit within our docs to mention that kubectl print, and basically all of the server-side printing does not return anything that has priority higher than 0.
So I guess my initial thoughts are basically what would be the complexity of having the client react to different kinds of output. So I guess with that in mind, how expensive would it be to maintain, or how complex would it be to maintain in the future? Would we do this just for get, or would this be something that's implemented for every command? Could this be something that we probably make part of generic CLI options if we expect every command to uniformly handle it? And then also, I guess, I'm guessing we're providing a flag as well to just dump out all the columns regardless. So if we have something where the client, prints the columns that fit on the screen, I'm guessing there's also a flag we provide that allows users to overwrite that and just display everything as is. So yeah, I guess main questions are complexity of maintaining this, and how to disable it needed.
Well, my initial take into this would be rather to have a rather generic mechanism that could be reused across all of the kubectl. If we would implement it, it would be a CLI runtime probably helper, so that pretty much every command or plugin could reuse this functionality. I'm not sure about the complexity of this approach. I haven't dug into the topic that much. It might be as well that we will just close this issue as something that just needs a proper documentation, and that's a good approach as well. I'm not saying that we need to fix it, or a good fix for this problem can be as well updating the docs to be explicit about how the priority works and the additional printer columns.
I think, at least for the time being, while we gather more feedback, I would be a +1 on documenting the behavior of the current priority.
Yeah, I think that's a fair approach. Let's all create a docs update, and we'll close this issue as is for now. And then if somebody brings it up for rediscussion, we can always reconsider this and see eventual other approaches that can be taken.
That's good.
Okay, moving on to the last item in the agenda, which is the stand-ups. I think that...
Sorry to bug you, Maciej. I think that there was one other, it was put up here, this pod readiness gate. This is actually talking about printing. This is actually a major change to a very fundamental print command, kubectl get pods. There's a proposal to change how that looks. Now, the pod readiness gate has pretty much already been accepted. That's my understanding. This proposal is, how are we going to surface this idea of a readiness gate? Whether we'll surface it, and what that surfacing would look like. Can I copy this and put this down into one of the topics?
Sure. Let's give it a try and discuss the topic.
Yeah, here I'll actually open this.
I see that Ming is Minhan. I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
Yes.
So, can you go through your proposal and describe it?
So actually that link links to a cap of the Already++ proposal. I have another link which links to the 1 second, let me pull that up. The CLI changes for supporting this.
Yeah, so
let me paste that.
Could you throw that in the chat?
Yes, please. So okay, let me throw that in.
I already pasted. Yeah.
Okay,
great.
So the idea, let me briefly describe the idea of the Pod Ready++ proposal. So the pod readiness, before this proposal, the pod readiness is dictated by container readiness. So if all the containers are ready, then the pod is ready. And the container readiness is defined by the readiness probe and also kubelet internals. So the Pod Ready++ proposal aims to add extension to allow external feedback into the pod readiness. So the API works like this. So there's pod readiness gates defined in the pod spec, and the readiness gates are specifying the condition types. And third-party components can use patch to just patch the pod status for that particular condition. So kubelet will evaluate whether the conditions are true or false to decide whether the pod readiness is ready or not, right? So that's the basic idea of the proposal. So it's essentially this expand the definition of pod readiness to not only include the containers ready and also the conditions specified in the readiness gates. So currently, when user type kubectl get pods, there's a column called ready, and then the ready is like 2/2 or something that represent how many containers are ready in this pod. And then by inferring to how many are ready, and like referring to like if 2/2 are ready, then that this pod is ready, right? But with this pod ready plus proposal, effectively this does not like fully represent whether the pod is ready or not, because there is a readiness gate maybe hidden behind like in the pod spec. So when user, let's say in some Kubernetes deployment that utilize this pod readiness gate feature, when user try to debug, why is my pod not serving traffic? It's running, it's not serving traffic. Why is that? Naturally, the first thing to try it out is kubectl get pods. So it will see, okay, my pod is ready, and then most people won't know that, okay, won't know which to check next, right? Some people know, okay, I should probably check the endpoints, then people will get would double check the endpoints and see, okay, the endpoints are not ready, but still people don't know why is it not ready intuitively unless they read the whole pod ready plus proposal. So this doc aims to capture like the options we have to how to support pod ready plus in kubectl. So obviously the worst case is that we do nothing. We just keep the current behavior, and then the proposals. I hope I capture most of like the options we have. So yeah, so I'm from SIG Network, so I'm not a UI UX expert. So I wanted to present this to SIG CLI and see what people think and which one people like.
If I'm understanding correctly, would this be an additional column from now on, or would it be an additional column while the old one is deprecated? So it would supersede the existing ready column.
So this is up to the community to decide whether column, whether we add a column to like kubectl get pods. Obviously that's quite disruptive. Like as Brian already pointed out, it's like many docs that needs to be updated to to reflect this.
So my first question would be, what is the current state of the pod ready plus feature? Is it a feature, or is it a beta feature? How far in the process we are with it?
So it's already, the main mechanism are already in kubelet. So most of the changes are in kubelet and the API server. So the changes are already in since Kubernetes 1.11. So the Kubernetes 1.11 is already in most of the mechanism, and then it's alpha, marked as alpha in 1.11. And in 1.12, we just switch it on by default and mark it as beta. And there's not much change in 1.12 for this particular feature. Most of the mechanism is already in place in 1.11. So I would expect this to be like basically default on.
Based on the comments and reading the doc, I'm personally leaning towards the second approach, where we would leave the current get pods as is, and then add the readiness gate, which is an extended feature still, as part of the so-called wide output, which means by default you would only get the output from one. But if you would ask for extended output with -O wide, you would get that additional information. This would first of all allow the backwards compatibility, but at the same time would allow people who would like to leverage this mechanism to quickly get to that information.
So that is what is proposed for number 5, exactly what you said.
Right.
Just so we're clear, one of the downsides of that is that once these readiness gates are in place, the default output is going to show that it's running and ready sometimes when the readiness gates are not complete and not ready. And so if you have to do the -O wide, it's not telling you in a default manner what is the true condition.
Right, but it also, the readiness gates will also depend on what is being specified inside of your pod spec. If you don't specify anything, at least that's my understanding, if you don't specify anything as your readiness gate, there will be no additional checks from the readiness gate. Which basically means they won't be giving you any additional information. And from my understanding, this is not a required field.
Yes.
Which basically means it is an optional functionality, which is not required, which might not be said, which basically means if it's not required, we should not print it. If you do use it, you need to explicitly set that data. And then only then it does make sense for you to output that information. We could, and probably that is a good middle point, to change the current ready column to a slightly different name to express the difference between container ready and the readiness gate. But still, I would go for the readiness gate being as the optional, such as the pod readiness specific spec field is optional.
So you would have, if there were a readiness gate, so I think my understanding is the common case for this readiness gate is like a load balancer, which takes a long time to set up. Your containers are already running. It says that they're ready and they're running, but in fact, your pods would not be getting any traffic while the load balancer, while this readiness gate hasn't been set yet. So it sounds like there's going to be a time frame when the default output is not going to accurately reflect the status of the pods for that particular. I mean, if you are smart enough to actually do the -O wide, then you would know, oh, okay, my load balancer isn't up yet. That's why it's not getting traffic. Seems like there's a high probability of confusion unless we, as default, show this this extra information when readiness gates are used.
Right, but what the readiness gate field is showing when you have not set the spec field in a pod? Is it going to always be 2 by 2, as in this example, or it will be 0 by 0, or what will be its value?
So the readiness gate cannot be updated after the pod is created. So it does not allow update the readiness gate. That's the current API design.
Right, but my question is, assuming I did not specify the readiness gate for my pod, and I created the pod as is with just the defaults, and I'm doing get pods, what will be the output of, well, obviously container ready, assuming we're talking about the sample pod, which is 2 pods. The readiness will be always, the ready column will always hold 2 by 2 values. What will be the value of readiness gate, assuming I did not set it, which means it's empty? What will be the readiness gate value?
0 by 0. None.
I'm only, so my biggest concern is that, first of all, this is a beta feature, and like Brian, I'm okay with changing the extended output, but I'll be very cautious by adding optional fields into the default values, especially when this is not a GA feature yet. I would rather start with this being an extended column, and as we see that the community is reusing this over and over again, and they are requesting this field. First of all, this is promoted to GA, and then as we see that the community does require this field to be present by default and the default get pods output, then we can consider the migration from extended column to a primary column, let's call it that way. But let's start it with this being the primary, the extended column, since this is a optional field, and let's keep it as an optional within the printer as well.
Okay. So just another question. Is it fair enough to ask for, let's say, the default output of kubectl get pods to change the column title ready to container ready?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although I'm not 100% sure that I like the container ready, I would need to go through the current columns that we return. What are the current values? What we have? I can't remember off the top of my head. What are the current values? What are the approach? I would have a look at what we have, and based on that, I would try to come up with a name. So I'm not 100% sure about the actual naming, but it does make sense to have the default column being renamed, so that there is a difference between the container ready and the readiness gate.
Okay.
That is a fair change.
Okay, sounds good.
That's the one I want to make sure that it's true.
But I'm guessing that since we're already in a code slash, this won't happen until 1.13. It's a little bit too late for that one to learn. Okay. In that case, yeah, I think that's a reasonable.
Okay, so I will write up the summary, and then
yeah,
and then
please update the thread that you created in the SIG CLI mailing list with what we decided. Okay.
Okay. Cool.
Cool. Thanks very much.
All right.
Okay. We're almost up to an hour, which is a little bit like over 5 minutes. So let's quickly go through stand-ups and we will be able to close the meeting. The most important thing I think that we have from our side is that we managed to split the generic CLI options, which is basically a set of toolkits for building CLI plugins, into a separate repo. Like it was stated several times before, currently it's part of the staging. There's a CLI runtime. There's only a bunch of printing related mechanism and config flags parsing. We are hoping to extend the functionality of the CLI runtime repo with additional stuff that we decide that are generic enough for plugin authors and or basically people who are interested in writing kubectl like tools. Rather, as soon as I get an approval from SIG architecture, we will create a CLI runtime repository under Kubernetes organization, and we will be publishing the contents of that staging repo into that repo. Additionally, as a second step, we also created a sample CLI plugin. It was stated during our last meeting that we have a cap for plugin mechanism and implementation of the new plugin mechanism. I'm very happy to note that we merged both the cap and the mechanism right after last meeting, which basically means currently for you to write a kubectl plugin is that you just need to have a binary that has a prefix of kubectl dash, and whatever will be after the dash will be the name of the plugin. So for example, if I have kubectl dash foo, this basically expands to being able to invoke kubectl foo command. There are some helpers. There are some helpers that will allow you to list the plugins, if I remember correctly, kubectl plugin list. And additionally, we created one another staging repo, which is sample CLI plugin, which showcases how to write a sample CLI plugin and built on top of the functionality from the CLI runtime to show how to reuse those bits in a plugin. So that's basically it from the CLI runtime and plus plugin world. Sean, do you have any updates on the server-side apply, maybe?
Actually, not much. Haven't been keeping track of that, to be honest. I do know that there is one PR that Antoine is has been trying to work on, which does a significant change on the dry run flag. Instead of making it a bool, it is actually significantly more involved data structure, whether it's client side or server side. So mostly my understanding is they've been working on getting dry run plugged all the way through, and including in more than just the apply. There's other commands that have dry run flags that would be affected by this PR. Daniel Smith is back from parental leave, and he was running the group. And so I think that they'll be making more progress, but to be honest, I haven't kept track of it.
Yes, I did see the dry run thing. I commented them that I would like to see the dry run functionality, the mechanism behind it, being part of the CLI runtime, because I think that this type of functionality is what we created the CLI runtime for, to be able to inject people with a common set of functionalities, how to work with dry run, either local dry run or the server-side dry run.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'll mention that to Antoine when I talk to him.
Sure.
He's in France right now, by the way.
Pretty close by.
Yeah, just
Okay.
just stop by and talk to him. Yeah.
Does anyone else have any topics they want to bring up or share with the group?
Not a Scrum topic, but Matcha and I will be demoing the sample CLI plugin tomorrow at the community meeting if anybody would like to see it in action.
Yeah, exactly. So if you want to learn a little bit about the sample CLI plugin or how to write a plugin, come by and see our tomorrow's demo during Cube community meeting. Okay, with that, I think we can close the meeting. Additional reminder, we are changing the SIG CLI meeting number. Stay tuned for a calendar update and see you in 2 weeks on a new number. Thanks all. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.